Hello, if you could please tell us who you are, where you were as a graduate student, WPA, and where you're at now.
Sure. So I'm Catherine Daly O'Mara. You can call me Kat. I did my graduate work at Arizona State University. I got my PhD in English in the Writing, Rhetorics, and Literacies strand, specializing mainly in writing program administration and second language writing. When I was in my graduate WPA position, I did a lot of work with our multilingual students, a lot of international students. Um, and I recently started my new position. Let's see, it's a tenure track position. I'm the assistant professor of rhetoric and composition and director of composition at Emporia State University in Emporia campus.
Awesome. So most of the interview is going to pertain to your graduate work, but if your new role at Emporia kind of, also plays a part, feel free to share those experiences. When you were working at ASU, did you have an official title? And could you also just give us a quick snapshot of like what type and size of school that was?
Sure. So, like I said, I was working a lot with the multilingual student population as someone who's specializing in L2 writing. And that's also connected to the graduate level WPA work that I've done. For 2 years, I was the Associate Director of Second Language Writing, working directly under the Director of Second Language Writing, who was Dr. Paul K. Matsuda. And this graduate level position allowed me to do a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
I oversaw the teacher training practicum for teachers in the writing program who wanted to teach multilingual sections of first year comp. I was able to do a lot of professional development workshops. And in this position, I was also able to design a couple of courses. For example, I piloted a academic writing for international students. It was a graduate level academic writing class.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also instituted a type of internship opportunity that linked our TESOL students, who were master's and undergraduate certificate seeking students, with a section of multilingual first year writing. And they were basically embedded tutors. And they were L2 writing tutors or kind of TAs to help out in the class as well. And so I was able to do a lot of that work as the associate director of L2 writing.
Great.
Did that answer the question?
Yes,
Okay.
and more.
Okay.
When did and I think I'm especially interested in this question because it sounded like you were really doing like a lot of work in an official capacity in that role as a graduate student. Um, when did you first identify an interest in WPA work, and how did you kind of get started into it?
Sure. I think it's because um, whenever I start something new, whether I'm brand new at it or coming in with a little bit of experience, it's always the way that my brain works is I look at what's working well and then where things might be improved.
Hmm.
And so, with regard to that graduate WPA position, um, one of the surefire ways that I knew I would be able to make some kind of lasting changes, um, positive changes for the department, was if I was holding some of those more official titled positions. Um, and also, luckily for me, I wasn't really fighting anyone for the job. I was the
Hmm.
only person um, in my year in the PhD program who had a vested interest in doing this position. And so I kind of stepped into it. I was offered it, and I loved it. And luckily, after 2 years, there were people who were coming up behind me um, who also wanted this position, so I was able to very effectively pass the torch to them. Um,
Yeah, so it sounds like you really identified a strong interest in WPA work early on. Like, when did you kind of become aware of and like really feel kind of like you started to gravitate towards WPA work?
Sure. Well, I think it really does help that Shirley Rose is the WPA at Arizona State.
Yeah.
Um, I figured that I would do something in some kind of administrative capacity when I started my master's program, and then when I moved to Arizona, I found out that it actually had a name, Writing Program Administration. And so I was really fortunate early on to see some of these, I guess, more well-known scholars in our field, um, who were really interested in I don't know, getting other grad students excited about WPA work.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it all started. I think I've always been some kind of person at the helm, I guess, ever since doing student council in middle school and high school and stuff, and how that translated into my collegiate work and everything like that. And I figured, for me as a PhD student, not knocking literature PhDs or anything like that, but I wanted to do something specific for my dissertation and moving forward that I knew would have a direct effect, positive effect on real people and real situations.
Hmm.
And I felt like WPA work was a really, really great venue for that, because
Great.
it allows you to make those kinds of programmatic changes and everything for the better.
Right. Um, Maybe too, especially because, your interest, and I think a lot of people's interest in WPA work, when it begins early as a graduate student, it's really enabled by their environments. You mentioned like mentors. Could you maybe quickly describe like a bit about your graduate program, like, how big it is, what kinds
Yeah,
of
sure.
what kinds of initiatives for like WPA work are present there?
Sure.
Um,
So there's WPA related graduate courses, I believe, every semester.
okay.
The fall and spring semesters, there's some sort of course that's offered. The one that I took had to do with archival research as WPA, and kind of doing um, some institutional history, digging around in there and that kind of stuff. It's a very large institution. ASU is a Research One institution, and I don't know how many PhD students, graduate students we have, but I want to say there's probably at least 50, um, but not all of those are RedCom people. But
Okay.
there's always a critical mass of students who want to take these classes.
Yeah, that sounds helpful. Whereas, I'm thinking about my own experience. I have a cohort of two, me and
Yeah,
one other person, right?
and
So,
well, like, I mean, I just very serendipitously happened to land in this program where there was a specialist in second language writing and a specialist in writing program
mhm,
administration. And I feel like not everyone gets as lucky as I do in that regard. And I think that's why the organization like the CWPA, and specifically the WPA Go, I think that's why those kinds of organizations are really vital for people who have interest in WPA work but might be the only RedCom person in their cohort, or
right.
the only person who, you know, gives a shit about WPA work on their campus. Targeting those individuals who might feel like they're not necessarily as supported as they want to be in their home institutions. But I was lucky enough to be supported like that at ASU.
Great. Um, so this is more of a existential question, maybe. What is WPA work for you? What does WPA work look like for you? So, like, how do you kind of conceptualize and define that work?
Sure, and I have. Okay, so what does WPA work look like? I
Hmm.
think there's a lot of similarities between what it looks like as a grad student versus one of the big kids who's, faculty, tenure track, whatever. Um, but I think a lot of it really has to do with um, figuring out what the culture is like at your institution. Think about what the culture of your writing program is, how your writing program is situated, within your department, and then how it's connected to other departments, across campus, whether that's in the disciplines or across the curriculum. choose your acronym. Um, but for me, a lot of WPA work has to do with being really organized and being a really open listener to people.
Mm-hmm.
My dissertation work was looking at 9 teachers of multilingual first year composition and investigated the community that they did or did not create in our writing program at Arizona State. And there's so many factors that go into that, whether that's what the teacher role or rank is, the the friendships or I guess collegial connections that they make with their coworkers, the kind of training that they've received outside of the program versus when they get in the program, the opportunities for collaboration, for professional development. All of those things, I think, have the potential to affect the community in a writing program in really impactful ways. And for me, the WPA is kind of the person who orchestrates all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And who has kind of a finger on the pulse of what people in the department on the ground doing the work day in and day out, what their experiences are like, and being receptive and responsive to their perceptions and to their needs.
Great. So I guess this line of questioning now will kind of go a little bit further in that direction, in that few WPAs have a consistent daily routine. So we're kind of interested in getting some snapshots of like what a day in the life looks like. Um, so, maybe on and especially I think because it's even more varied at the graduate student level. Um, what might like a typical day look like as a grad student WPA for you? And sometimes those days, there's different kinds of days too. So if you wanted to kind of
Sure.
break that down, you could, maybe there's some days where you teach more and some days where you're not in the
Right.
classroom, but still engaged in WPA work. So maybe just like one or two kind of quick snapshots of like what your day might look like.
Sure. So um, if I was gonna, if I have a day that's more teaching heavy, what it would be was teaching first year composition, but then also teaching the teacher training practicum for new teachers of multilingual first year composition. So that's
Hmm.
doing a lot of theoretical readings in second language writing theory and trying to connect that to more practical hands-on activities and ideas that teachers can put into their own pedagogy and put into the classroom. And so that's a lot of reading, but then informal discussing about um, how to implement these theories into their classes. So that's more of a teaching day. There's also kind of behind the scenes planning work that needs to get done, at least in my experience as a graduate WPA. For example, I was on the second language writing committee,
Hmm.
and we planned different workshops. I've done a couple workshops on, for example, plagiarism and uh, proper citation
Hmm.
and how international students might struggle with those kinds of things in the U.S. higher educational context. There was a workshop that we did about using students L1 versus L2 in the first year composition classroom, and we had a couple different teachers come in and sit on a panel with different perspectives. Um, Other things related to kind of the behind the scenes WPA work, we worked with the larger writing program on initiatives for the National Day on Writing. Um, we, let's see, we at Arizona State every year they have a composition conference, which is kind of a hands-on conference that a lot of our composition instructors um, share their work for first year comp. And so we wanted to make sure that there was enough multilingual writing teacher presence um, at that conference. Um, Other things too, I know that many people might be familiar with all the hullabaloo and the bad press that Arizona State got for their apparent mistreatment of adjunct workers
Hmm.
when they decided to go from a 4-4 teaching load to a 5-5 teaching load. It was this big thing, and as you can imagine, the morale in our writing program especially for our contingent faculty members, was pretty much at an all-time low, at least for my 5 years that I was there.
Hmm.
And so I was thinking, well, what can I do? I'm just a graduate student, but is there anything that I can do to kind of boost morale? And
Hmm.
so I was fortunate enough to be able to institute the second language writing L2 writing teacher feature. And so what it was we had kind of a learning management system that it's called Digication, and so people can kind of create their own online portfolios with that. And so through this technology, which the writing program at large was trying to push, so that was another reason I think why it got off the ground. There's this teacher feature, and so second language writing teachers were asked to nominate um, one another to be featured for the month. And if you were chosen, you got to put in your bio to tell a little bit about yourself outside of the writing program, to talk a little bit about why you liked teaching multilingual students. And then these teachers were also asked to share some kind of deliverable, whether it's, like an activity or a writing project that they had done with their international students or multilingual students and things like that. Um, and once a teacher was nominated and the ball was rolling on it, it was advertised throughout the program. So I mean, there was flyers that were put up on the writing program's bulletin board. There was an email blast. There was all those kind of touchy-feely, warm and fuzzy, good feelings that were going on surrounding this. And so that was something that I was probably the most proud of as a graduate WPA, to be able to institute something um, that that made other people feel good about what they were
That's awesome. Well, and that kind of connects to another question I was interested in asking was if you could name some of like the kinds of writing you might produce during your, on any given day as a
doing.
WPA. Like, you could think of it maybe as like the genres,
Oh
right?
yeah, sure. So definitely a lot of course planning, a lot of syllabus writing,
Hmm.
um, a lot of regarding the classes that I was teaching as a grad student, writing those discussion board prompts and keeping all of those kinds of written things all cohesive over the course of a semester. I also wrote a number of course proposals for the graduate academic writing course and for the internship that I created. So
Hmm.
that was an important genre for me to learn. Um, and even uh, what else was there? So there's taking minutes at a meeting using
Hmm.
Robert's rules or whatever that is.
Robert's Rules
Uh,
of Order. Yeah.
yeah. So I would learn how to do that. Definitely trying to figure out how to phrase emails in the right way to certain constituencies to get what you
Right.
want. Um, and so yeah, email was another really important one. Um,
Hmm.
and then
Were there documents associated with those professional development workshops you mentioned earlier?
sure, yeah, I mean something as surface level as like the flyer, creating the flyer and
Hmm.
the text to go on the flyer for that. Um, but then also having available, like a follow-up survey for people. Um, Another thing that we did with the second language writing committee is we did a program-wide potluck at the end of the fall semester, kind of a kickoff to the holiday uh, vacation that was coming up. And so it was put on by the second language writing committee, but everyone in the program was involved. So kind of figuring out how to get all those kinds of logistical things figured out as well.
Right. Um, what were some of or you could even name just one, but what was most challenging, maybe, or some of the biggest challenges you faced as a graduate WPA?
Sure. So the biggest thing that I think I felt as a graduate WPA is I'm just a graduate student. Um, and coming into a position like that and working with teachers who had been at the school for over 20 years, trying to kind of navigate that imposter syndrome that I felt as how am I supposed to get these people to listen to me? You know, um, And I think that really, as a graduate WPA, I think that's where your relationship with your mentor is really important, because I was mentored by Paul Matsuda, who was a tenured professor. He's an expert in second language writing, and so for him to vouch for me at the graduate student level is something that's um, really vital, I think, for a
Mm-hmm.
graduate WPA's success, is to have
Mm-hmm.
those solid mentors and mentoring relationships in place. And I think because my experience was so positive as a graduate WPA, I'm all that much more eager to pay it forward now that I'm here in my new position, and to mentor the graduate teaching associates and those who are interested in WPA work, and trying to find venues for them to um, channel and harness that excitement into doing good things for a larger audience, for the program and beyond. I think that's really important.
Great. Maybe I'll kind of go with a more conceptual question, so kind of shifting gears a bit. Are there any particular theories or approaches that ground your practice? I heard you saying earlier being an open listener was essential, and it seems to me like that's something that might come from particular theoretical approaches.
Sure.
So are there any particular
So yeah,
theories?
if I had to talk about one, and it's near and dear to my heart because it's the approach that I used with my dissertation, and I actually have the book right here. It has to do with institutional ethnography, and this was kind of a methodology that I learned about as I was trying to figure out my dissertation. And I read an article in 3Cs by Michelle LaFrance and Melissa Nicholas. And basically, it was talking about the methodology of institutional ethnography, or IE, and
Hmm.
why the heck haven't we been using it in composition studies? And then recently, actually, I have it here as well, the most recent edition of Writing Program Administration. Michelle LaFrance actually has an article about institutional ethnography in the spring 2016 edition of WPA. And so being able to look at IE as a methodology, to me, it just makes sense for
Hmm.
people who want to do WPA work. It has to do with mapping people's social relations and the quote, everyday and every night work that people do, I guess, on the ground in the trenches. And what institutional ethnography does is it puts the researcher actually in the research site. A lot of times these IE researchers are materially situated within the research context, and so they know the people that they're, I guess, studying or researching, and they know firsthand some of the issues, or IE calls it problematics, that are going on in an institution. And so looking at the way that things happen in an institution, and at all different levels, not just coming, from above or standing as an outsider point of view, but really being kind of embedded in this context.
Hmm.
Um, that's really why I think institutional ethnography is a methodology, or I guess you could call it kind of a theory, that I use to inform the kind of work I do as WPA. It has a lot to do with listening to people, seeing what's going on, looking at the texts that are used, the words that people use, the way they talk about certain situations,
Hmm.
because what one person says and the terms that they use might not be the way another person talks about it. So being able to kind of map out those kinds of relations, those kinds of perceptions, to me, that largely informs what I do as a writing program administrator. And I think being able to practice that in my dissertation, and then moving into this position as the official WPA at a university, it's really allowed me to kind of take a step back and look at the way that an institution is set up, and who those stakeholders are, and what's important to each one of those different groups of stakeholders, and trying to kind of come up with solutions that benefit all parties involved.
Thank you. Fantastic. So I'll end with kind of an open-ended kind of question. Basically, the question is, do you have a story you'd like to share with the organizational membership? Something interesting that happened to you in your work, something you learned in your training, something that just hasn't come up yet in the interview that you think is worth sharing.
Sure. So this probably comes from my close relationship with the WPA Go, but I do want to talk about it and
Hmm.
just say flat out how absolutely important it is for anyone who wants to do WPA work once they're done with their graduate studies. You need to get involved with WPA Go. I think that the organization offers so many positive things for those interested in WPA work. They do so many different opportunities for mentoring. I know that the mentoring at Seas and the Breakfast Buddies gets mentors and mentees together. I know that we also are doing, or they are starting a lot more outreach with other graduate organizations like the Writing Center Graduate Organization and the Writing Across the Curriculum Graduate Organization. There's a lot of
Hmm.
things in the pipeline for that. Um, and I think, I mean, just things like planning a social event at a national conference. Um, those are all opportunities that the Go has afforded me. Um, and so um, I just think it's a really great organization. I know that I learned a lot about dealing with different personalities and doing so professionally and in a way that um, reflects positively on the organization as a whole. That's something that a skill that I learned through my active work in the WPA Go. Um, yeah, I mean, it's just I think it's something that anyone who's interested in WPA work as graduate students should definitely check it out.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.